Keep changing things on me. That's the
That's
problem.
for sure. Go ahead and sit right there. My stuff.
All right. So it sounds like I was already introduced, but my name's Briza, and I'm a dietitian at Dornbecker Children's Hospital, where I've worked for 5 years. Before that, I was out in Michigan, so it's a little nicer here. But I had to include a snowy picture of Dornbecker that I took one day. So I don't think I'll say anything that's truly groundbreaking today, and that's not really my intention anyways, but just to kind of go over an overview of infant and pediatric formulas, which you guys use all the time, talk about some main vitamins and minerals of concern, and then go over a case study. So, of course, we all know that breast milk is best. We want every infant to get to drink breast milk. However, sometimes that's just not possible. And so supporting that mom in that decision and kind of helping them choose the formula that works best for that infant is really important. Of course, FDA regulates the infant formulas, which will come up in a later topic. The standard concentration, of course, we know the 20 cal with the whole 19 cal Similac situation. And then we can, of course, as dietitians, make those formulas any concentration that we want by changing that recipe around. I gave this talk to a group of doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs, and I reminded them, please send them to a dietitian for a recipe. It's really important that we are the ones providing those recipes because formulas are constantly changing. They're hard to keep up with. The mixing changes ever so slightly and things like that. So definitely providing good recipes. Of course, NeoSure and Enficare are 22 calorie per ounce standard concentration, and it's important, as we all know, to not use these as higher calorie formulas because they're higher in nutrients and other things that a term infant does not necessarily need. That's something that I commonly run into. I'll be referred to a dietitian for failure to thrive, and they've switched them to NeoSure for that higher calories, and I'll switch them off and give them a recipe for a 24 cal or something different. So, of course, you guys know 2 big competing companies, Enfamil and Similac, and then Gerber, of course, as well, but the main one's still those 2. Infant formulas, so it sounds like you guys reviewed these or have these, yeah. And so this is the way I was actually taught formulas as an intern and kind of find it quite helpful to think. So at the bottom, we have the intact proteins, the partially hydrolyzed, the fully hydrolyzed, and the amino acid bases at the top. The cost increases as you move up. I forgot my papers, so but it's roughly like $1 per 8 ounce bottle increase as you go from the bottom upwards. So formula companies, being the formula companies, will encourage you to go to that top most expensive one. However, if I can get a baby to grow on Enfamil Nutramigen with their milk protein intolerance, I'm going to, instead of taking them all the way up to that Neocate or Elicare or Pure Amino or Alpha Amino. In regards to the Senio, in our GI practice, we do not utilize that formula because we did not feel like there was strong enough evidence for those pre and probiotics. And if I remember correctly, it's not for premature infants, or at least not in the NICU. And then Neocate's website actually says that it's not to be used with short bowel syndrome patients. So that is something to keep in mind. I've never used it. I think maybe I've had one infant who came to me on it, and I was like, "You're on it, that's fine." But I really don't have any experience. The taste, again, I have no idea why it might be better for oral than enteral. It all goes to the same GI system. So
thank you. That does help because we get more of our referrals from the doctors. So we've been holding off from the manufacturer for years. And if we need to just keep holding up, we definitely can't. So
Yeah.
the demand is coming from the clinical side.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that perspective.
So, the other specialized formulas, and maybe we could talk about infant formulas all day long, but I won't. So these are other ones that you'll run into or see babies on, like Similac PM6040 for renal babies, fast carbohydrate free for keto, and metabolic formulas are a whole long list of things that I can't pronounce. All right, but we know in reality this is what a family is going to run into when they go to the grocery store or Target to find an infant formula. So not only are they like sleep deprived and overwhelmed by a crying baby who will not stop crying because they have colic or they're fussy or they're gassy or they're, saying have bloody mucousy poops, and they go and they're going to run into this, and there's even more than this, but all I could fit. So, and they're all kind of variations on a theme. And so, again, it's nice to have options for that family who's really struggling with finding what's best for their baby, but it's also extremely overwhelming. So I didn't include the non-US formulas like the Hips and the Hollies, and we'll talk about those again later. So back to the simple pyramid. So that intact protein, of course, if a mom is not able to breastfeed, the standard ones are Enfamil Infant or Similac Advance. There's now the Pros and the NeuroPros and the, again, keep it simple. They're dairy-based, and they're standard term infant formulas, been around for quite some time. Then there's the Enfamil Inspire and Similac Organic, which are the more niche ones that, again, might align better with a family's preferences, and that's great. It's great to have that option. The Enfamil AR and Similac for Spit Up, like you guys were just mentioning, they're the rice starch thickened. The calories are still balanced, though, amongst those carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, which is nice because, again, if you're going to add rice cereal or oat cereal, I guess is now the thing, to infant formula, you're adding calories only from carbohydrates and from nothing else. The soy-based formulas, Prosobi, Isomil, and Gerber soy, of course, some parents or families feel strongly that they want their baby on soy. There's lots of families that do not believe in soy. Typically, the only time that I would have a baby on soy is really for galactosemia. In GI, if they're milk protein intolerant, they're likely soy intolerant, or they've already tried soy before coming to us. So we skip that altogether. The partially hydrolyzed ones, so those are going to be the ones that are like labeled for fussiness and gas. And so these are those colicky babies that, for whatever reason, are just not tolerating standard formula well. So that dairy protein, I like to describe it as it was kind of stepped on. So instead of being intact, it's like kind of partially broken. But the body can still recognize it like as dairy protein. So it's not suitable for milk protein intolerant babies. But again, if you just have that baby that isn't doing well, but no like specific signs of any intolerance or allergy, these formulas are worth a try. They're not that much more expensive. They're about the same price. They're still nutritionally complete and regulated and all that good stuff. So I really don't have a problem if a family, changes to these formulas. And they do all the time. They're readily available on store shelves and things like that. The cardiac dietitian at Dornbecker really likes Similac Total Comfort for her cardiac babies. It's just something anecdotally that she's seen. I saw that back in Michigan too. The cardiac dietitian there likes that. So that is something. The fully hydrolyzed, so these proteins are fully broken down. They're still dairy-based, so I do talk to my families and say, I've just taught you to look for all these words that mean dairy, and then I'm giving you a formula that says dairy, but this is, fully broken down. The body shouldn't recognize it. It's not to say that the body will, or the baby's body won't. But again, if you have, in GI, we commonly see the bloody, the mucousy poops, the poor growth, or any combination of that. And so these are typically that next step formula. Other situations, for just a baby that you can't get to grow, like there's, again, the cost goes up, but it might be worth a shot. There is, previously, I think it still exists, the AAP came out with a guideline recommending either extensively hydrolyzed or those spit up formulas for reflux. I had a doctor who was very excited about this new guideline that had come out, or recommendation, and we happened to have a super refluxy baby, and so they were like, oh, let's put them on Nutramigen. I was like, go ahead, but that stuff tastes bad. And sure enough, that baby was like, and so we tried Enfamil AR, and sure enough, reflux got better, and the baby accepted the formula. Now, reflux can be a sign of milk protein intolerance. Rarely is it isolated just to that, but again, something that is out there and that can be tried. That fully hydrolyzed protein maybe empties through the stomach quicker. I think that's kind of the thought behind it, but again, yeah. Enfamil progestamil, so this is the dairy protein, again, that's still fully broken down, and the fat content is adjusted for more medium chain triglycerides. So these are for the liver babies, so the biliary atresia or the Alagille's babies that are not able to utilize all that long chain fats as well. So if we give them the fat that their body can absorb better, like the medium chains, then it bypasses the liver and helps them out. So MCT tastes bad. I'm sure that exploded bottle of MCT oil did not smell good. And so again, Nutramigen and Alimentum, they both have quite a scent when you open it, and quite a flavor if you're willing to taste it. And progestamil tastes even worse. So babies are, if they're young enough, you can usually get them to drink these formulas because they don't know like what good is yet, I guess, is like how I like to think of it in my head. But if you have like a 4-month-old baby, 5-month-old, they're probably too smart. Gerber Extensive HA, I'm not quite sure what Gerber did, but they magically took a lot of that flavor and smell away. So when you pop open a can of Gerber Extensive HA, it has like a formula scent to it, versus Nutramigen and Alimentum sound like, or smell like, I don't know, cheese and like dirty gym socks. So, like, it just doesn't smell good. So I'm sure the formula companies don't like me describing it like that, but it doesn't smell good. So if I do have one of those smarter babies, then or babies that can obviously taste or are refusing, then Gerber Extensive HA is kind of my like Hail Mary, because it is a little harder to find, and it is still relatively new on the market. So again, it can be found, but I have definitely had some families have a little difficulty. So, and then the top, so that amino acid based formula. So these proteins were never built. Instead of the house or the partially broken down house, there's all the bricks that built that house. So again, I pull out a can and I explain the ingredient list instead of being able to say they have milk protein in it. This is all those building blocks of that protein, and that's why that ingredient list looks so scary and weird. But it's just those building blocks of the protein. So the Elicare and the Neocate, the pure amino and the alpha amino. The pure amino is from 0 to 24 months, so that's just something kind of different about it, even though it says infant. So these formulas, again, they taste worse because I guess amino acids just don't taste good. That's probably why we don't eat eat them not built. But these formulas are completely hypoallergenic. They're very specialized. They're for infants, again, with, if it's very, very intense milk protein intolerance, and we don't want to take extra time to try a fully hydrolyzed, we will occasionally bump all the way up here for infants with eosinophilic esophagitis, short bowel syndrome, which actually there's some debate over short bowel syndrome. Maybe not debate. I won't say it's that intense yet, but there are Seattle Children's actually starts their short bowel syndrome babies, depending on the situation, on standard formula, because they're a little worried about setting them up for other food allergies when they're older, which is a good point, because we know that early introduction is likely better and more protective against food allergies. So, but for patients with FPIES, food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome, at our GI practice, we put them on these. There's different guidelines around the world for that. But again, this is what we use. So of course, families are always trying to find what aligns with their beliefs and what they believe is best for their infant. They love their child unconditionally, and they want to provide the utmost best nutrition for them. And so they oftentimes go online or talk to neighbors or friends, or hopefully their doctor or their dietitian about it, and get advice. And of course, not all advice is good. And so we've certainly had experiences with, families using friends' breast milk or breast milk that they get online, goat milk, and we'll talk about that, homemade infant formulas. So there's recipes online for these, and frequently they start with, do not tell your doctor that you're giving this to your infant, which should be a warning sign to families that maybe it's not the best idea. But again, there's plenty of recipes out there. I've done nutritional analysis of several of them, and have never found one similar to infant formula. And it's my best guess, because all of these things are dietary supplements, which, as we know, aren't necessarily regulated very tightly by the FDA. So yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't forget to freeze the chicken liver, things like that. And milk alternatives. So thankfully, the milk alternative containers that I've read, they say like not suitable for infants. So that's helpful. So I decided to do that Google search that parents do. So I Googled best breast milk alternatives, and I made sure to clear my queue or my history and try to get the most pure answer as I possibly could. And this was the first one, which, why scroll down any farther? And so breast is best, yay, woo-woo. But donated breast milk, also amazing, as long as it's through like a milk bank. However, that's not financially usually feasible. Formula feeding, I don't know what was after that ... I hope it was FDA regulated formulas, homemade formula. So there's that. And then goat milk, coconut milk, and hemp milk. So, and I have had families tell me, well, goat milk is the most similar to breast milk. And it was a family I knew well enough, and I said, well, it's most similar to goat breast milk for a baby goat, not for a human baby. So that belief is definitely out there. So, but basically the answer is just no, no, and no. So we at Dornbecker are a resource for the entire state and Southwest Washington, and so we'll we haven't had one for a while, So we'll probably get one here soon. But about once a month there for a while, we were getting calls from primary care saying, I have this baby on goat milk, or I have this baby on homemade infant formula. And my lovely coworkers were like, let me have you talk to Briza. And so when you look at it, goat milk is most similar to cow's milk. And most parents know that cow's milk is not appropriate for infants. But again, there's this belief out there that goat milk is so much different. Goat milk is not safe for any baby, like we've been talking about. When we put infants on a milk protein-free diet, or the mother if they're breastfeeding, then we say no cow milk of any sort, no goat milk of any sort, no sheep's milk of any sort. The protein is so similar that the body treats it the same. Homemade infant formulas are not safe, nutritionally complete, like I was saying. Raw is quite common, and of course we all know from food safety classes that it can contain E. coli, salmonella, listeria, campylobacter, which can all be potentially life-threatening or cause life-threatening complications. So if an infant's on goat milk, it's really important to counsel them about the dangers. They've likely heard from their primary care that's not okay, stop what you're doing. They've maybe mentioned the lack of folate in the goat milk, but they haven't learned about all of the other aspects of goat milk. And so my perspective is to understand why they chose goat milk to begin with. Like, did you, and I asked them outright, like, what about goat milk do you feel like is best for your baby? And I've heard, the farmer down the road had her, babies on it and they did just fine, or, it just aligns with what I believe this baby to need, and they tolerate it so well. I again get a diet history, kind of figure out, well, what other formulas or beverages by that point have they tried? And again, try to understand where they're coming from, knowing that this family is just trying to do the best thing for them.
I'm having a hard time hearing now that they're a little louder. Would you mind speaking a little louder?
No worries. I'll put my soccer voice on a little bit. All right. So I did a nutrient comparison of breast milk, a standard infant formula, and goat milk, because I like to have data, not to prove that someone is wrong, but to give all of the information, provide them the information, counsel why I'm concerned as a practitioner, and have them try to understand where I'm coming from, and that I also have the best interest of their child in mind, but try to meet them somewhere in the middle. So you can see, I'm trying to think, so the protein content is very high, the calcium content is high, mag, potassium, and sodium are all high, and then that folate is low. So doctors, for their board exam, my understanding is the only thing they need to know about goat milk for infants is that it's low in folate. They don't need to know anything about the fact that it's high in protein, potassium, sodium, calcium, and magnesium that are all being filtered by those brand new baby kidneys that are just trying to learn how to do their job. And I had a primary care flat out tell me that. Like, the only thing I knew about it was the folate, and you just educated me about all these other things that I had no idea about. So looking, and I have a handout for families with this information, with that recommended intakes, and then if they drink 800 calories a day, what does that look like number-wise? And I explained to them that more is not better, because that is an important thing to remember. So I point out, look, some of the numbers in the breast milk and the standard infant formula are out of range, and I'm aware of that, but those are known to be safe. And so, I don't just ignore the fact, because I don't want a family to come back and say, well, look, that, potassium is also out of range on an infant formula, but it's known to be safe. So looking at that goat milk, again, 3 times more protein, 4 times more calcium, only 12% of that folate, magnesium 5 times more, potassium 4, and sodium 3. So the summary of goat milk is it's not appropriate.
I'm sorry, we have a writing.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking if you could share that handout with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. All right, international formulas. So again, these are formulas that are available in other countries, but not regulated by our FDA. They are frequently regulated by that other country's version of the FDA. But the hips and the hollies. But what it all boils down to is that since they're not FDA regulated, we shouldn't be recommending them. And I used to have kind of a different stance on them than I do now, which is always good to change. I used to think, well, they're regulated by another agency and the baby's doing fine on them, and that country certainly has healthy babies. But what I realized, and this article pointed out, and kind of other things came to light, is that those formulas are purchased by, other companies, shipped and stored in their warehouses or whatever, and then shipped to those families who order them online. Number one, actually what they're doing is illegal, which I don't tell families what you're doing is illegal. But knowing that it is a little interesting. And then also if that hip company comes out and says, oh my gosh, we're contaminated with E. coli, that recall is not necessarily going to make it to the United States. That will make it to the country of origin, but not necessarily all the way here. So if I do have a family on one of these formulas, I do tell them that. I say, if there's a problem with that formula, that knowledge might not make it to you. So if there's a way to contact the company and be on some list or whatever, then maybe that can tick that box. But it doesn't tick the box of, is that formula being stored properly at that warehouse of this third-party company that probably sells other products that aren't as sensitive as infant formula. There was also some, I can't remember which brand, but there was some international formula that was mislabeled, and they don't follow the same labeling requirements as we do. So hypoallergenic is actually regulated differently depending on the country. So again, I used to be more okay with these, and now I'm kind of like if I can convince you otherwise, it might be best. But again, family, these formulas are very niche formulas, and one of them talks about where the specific cows graze and what they eat, and families like knowledge. They like to know everything they can about their formulas. So Dornbecker is actually coming up with a policy to not allow the use of these formulas in the hospital, and that's because we just don't know what is in them. So Colorado Children's Hospital has the same policy. So. All right, switching off infant formulas. So pediatric formulas. These, the vast majority of them are complete nutritional sources. Most formulas are 30 cal per ounce or 1.0, 1 calorie per mil, or 45, of course, 1.5s or 1.5 calories per ml. Again, you have two competing companies that are providing roughly the same products, and blended tube feeding products are certainly gaining in popularity. So, which is kind of interesting because many, many, many years ago, tube feeds were all just blended up foods and put down a tube. So it's kind of interesting that we're kind of going back to that in a way, in certain cases from these commercial formula, or these they're all commercial, but these like dairy-based formulas. So I have this same general pyramid. So the intake protein on the bottom, the fully hydrolyzed in the middle, and the amino acid based on top. It only expands a little bit more, and that's mainly because of the flavors, because a lot of these are taken by mouth. The blended tube feeding products on the side, I think there's even more now. But the Complete Pediatric is the one that's been around the longest. They came out with the Complete Pediatric Organic Blends. Those are those pouches to compete with like the Nourish. Nourish is, non-GMO and organic and free of the 8 major allergens, and it's a very, again, kind of fancy, in my opinion, formula because and Real Food Blends, though, has that little star on it because it's actually not nutritionally complete. They have a few different blends, a few different flavors. And they say if you rotate through the flavors like you would meals, supplement with some salt, and they give you recommendations, as well as I think it's calcium, then you can have a nutritionally complete blend. But I know one of our dietitians has kind of done that variety pack thing for kids, and it never quite works out. So, but for somebody who just needs a supplemental little tube feed, that could be a great option.
Quick question for you. Just got a request from Deschutes County. We've got a little one over there on Complete Pediatric, and it's the one kind of tube feeding like formula that we have on our formulary. And the reason we have it is that it gets denied so often by Medicaid.
Yeah.
Have you had success getting that covered by Medicaid?
If it's by tube, you're talking about the organic blends one?
Just the Complete Pediatric.
Just the complete. Not usually. The Complete Pediatric, as long as it's by tube, we don't usually have a problem. I wouldn't say though that it's 100% success rate, and that's because it's a little bit more expensive than say regular Pediasure, and the insurance company or Medicaid is going to want to know why. And the hard thing with the Pediatric Complete is it does contain dairy protein. So if you're doing it for like an intolerance reason, it's probably not the dairy, and it's kind of harder to justify. I would say the other formulas we have a much harder time getting covered because they're, Nourish is very, very expensive.
Well, if you have any resources, because we can cover to a certain amount, but we're supplemental. Yep. So we're wanting to figure out what is the system to be able to get it covered under Medicaid. And I always thought it was because it's considered more of a food rather than the supplement, that's why they're denying it.
I think it's under a different HCPCS code or whatever, and I think it's all just based on codes and what's covered and what's not. So, but I mean, if you do have intolerance, or I had a kid, for whatever reason, we tried everyone on the pyramid and we could not get that kid to grow. I was throwing tons of calories at them, and I can't even remember which blended tube feeding product we tried. Again, Hail Mary, and it worked. And we could only get them to grow on a blended tube feeding formula. Insurance would not cover it, so we switched them back, and they lost weight, and eventually we got it covered because we proved basically that for whatever reason that we can't prove medically, we can prove anecdotally with growth charts and weight trends and things like that. So yeah, those blended tube feeding products we run into all the time, them not wanting to cover because they are more expensive. So
a note from Laura that says that she did email the rep today to see if there's any programs that could help the parents.
Yeah, and I know Kate Farms has they have a lot of information about how to work with insurance companies, and they're willing, if you get the patient's permission, they're willing to work with the patient to help them get insurance coverage. So.
Speaking of those on Kate Farms, neither of them really asked for it. It was just what you were put on according to that, which is shocking to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did that happen? Okay.
Oh, wow.
And then I have kiddos on real food that they are like almost bypassing the insurance company and just as like advocating for themselves to that product.
Yeah.
Right, if you could summarize for the phone, that's helpful just to, because.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So someone was saying that they've had a couple kids on Kate Farms that just kind of were put on it, and then another one with Real Food Blends who's kind of managed to get around insurance. So I think, I think it's a barrier. I don't think it's a hard stop to not try these formulas. Kate Farms, since we're talking about it, their pediatric standard formula is a 1.2 calorie per ml, and then they actually do have a real food-based peptide formula. So it's hydrolyzed pea protein. It's their pediatric. Well,
Or close.
it is vegan. Yes, yeah. I think. Don't quote me on it, but I think the 1.2 is also vegan. So, and the peptide one is a 1.5. So it's a pediatric peptide 1.5. I just recently tasted these two formulas, and I would not drink the 1.5. The reps were like, "It tastes so good." I was like, "No, it's quite chalky." And I like 1.5s. Like I loved. Ensure Compact or Boost Compact, the 2.0. Oh my God, that thing was amazing. Tastes amazing. So I don't mind like the thick, but the Kate Farms Pediatric Peptide 1.5 was chalky. So I think it's that pea protein.
It's kind of thick too. So like my
More
son's on it,
biscuits.
and we have to add some almond milk to kind of like get it to go through a bottle. It's really thick.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, that's in my personal opinion, like that's kind of cool that we have a food-based peptide formula. Like that's pretty cool. Of course, these food-based formulas oftentimes have a lot more fiber, so that's something to think about. I had a kid who I could not get to grow on Nourish, and the family finally came up with, someone said that she poops way more than all the other kids, and for whatever reason, she was just not able to utilize those calories in Nourish, so switched her off and she grew. So fiber's helpful. It makes things move, but it can also slow things down and whatnot. So not included, of course, are toddler beverages, just because there's too many of them. Metabolic formulas again, and then some other specialized formulas like the keto ones and things like that.
What is your opinion of the toddler formulas?
My opinion on the toddler formulas is that if you have a kid who's 1 year, 1 month, growing well, eating enough solids, why do we need them? They're not, I think, aren't they all 20 cal per ounce? I never use them. And so, I think if you need a complete nutritional source for a kid who's not growing, I mean, Pediatric and Nutrient Junior are going to be your best bets. I think it's also not the end of the world for an infant to be on infant formula for an extra couple months. So if you have, a baby who's like, I think you're going to eat a little bit more and do just fine, like, I don't see the need to switch them off of their infant formula, if they're 13 months or something. I like to tell families that, well, the first birthday is extremely magical. Nothing actually magical changes about their baby's body between, 12 or 11 months and 29 days and 12 months and 2 days. So, they can be on that infant formula a little while longer. We have 5 and 6 year olds on infant formula sometimes still. We don't like that, but that's not by choice, granted. But, it's probably not harm, but we don't like that. So same sort of deal. So That under there says Boost Kit Essentials underneath the PowerPoint. But the milk protein, the standard formula. So if you just have a kid who's not growing, needs some extra calories, Nutrin Junior, Pediatric, Boost Kit Essentials 1.0, they're your standard milk-based formulas. The key, though, that I always like to tell parents is that we're adding these to add calories, not to replace the amazing foods that your kid is eating. They're also not suitable for kids who are picky. These are for kids who need extra calories to grow. Your picky eaters, if they're eating selective foods but they're growing just fine, a multivitamin and counseling and encouragement to try new foods and things like that. You'll see commercials that disagree with me, but we really want those formulas for kids that are not growing. Soy-based formulas, there's only one. So I think if you want to make some money developing a new formula, come up with a competition to Soy Bright Beginnings, because it's the only one, and it's hard to find. But it's a great formula. It's soy-based, again, for those either families that prefer or situations that require soy-based formulas. I did forget to mention one thing about the soy-based infant formulas. They are vegetarian. They are not vegan. So soy-based infant formulas, they still utilize vitamin D from lanolin, which is from sheep's wool. So while the sheep is fine, it's spared because they just take the wool, it's not vegan because it's from an animal product. So that's just something to think about. Milk protein and higher calories, so the Boost Kit Essentials 1.5 and the Pediatric 1.5. Again, competing products. The Pediatric 1.5 is a lot higher in protein than the Boost Kit Essentials 1.5. So that is something that I really look carefully at to make sure that I'm not giving them too much protein.
And what does the 1.5 indicate?
1.5 calories per ml.
Wow.
Yep. So for every 1 ml of a 1.5, you have 1.5 calories, and a 1.0, you have 1 calorie per ml. So they're still milk-based, like I was saying, complete nutritional sources, and they taste pretty good. Fully hydrolyzed, so again, it has that dairy protein, but it's completely broken down, so hopefully the body won't recognize it. Two big companies, Peptamen Junior and Pediatric Peptide, they both come in 1.0s and 1.5. The Peptamen Junior now does come in vanilla. I think the 1.5, I can't remember if the 1.0 does, but I know the 1.5 does. And then the Pediatric Peptide does come in flavors, which is nice. Pediatric Peptide hasn't been around that long, and I've tasted these. Peptamen Junior doesn't taste very good. Pediatric Peptide, in my personal opinion, tastes amazing, which my coworkers think I'm very strange. But so if you do have a kid who's malabsorbing or who hasn't grown out of their milk protein intolerance or isn't growing or has lots of vomiting on those standard formulas, switching to one of these and thinking, well, are they taking it orally or are they being tube fed? And then what's the age of the kid? I've had, 1-year-olds that haven't grown out of their milk protein intolerance, aren't eating well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to switch you to a formula for after one. I might switch them to Pediatric Peptide and they reject it because it's sweet and it tastes good. And they have been used to Nutramigen and Alimentum that taste not sweet, not good, and they actually do accept Peptamen Junior better. So I have to remember that my taste buds have tasted, really cool adult things, and that 12-month-old has had Nutramigen and maybe some pureed fruits and chicken, and they might be more willing to accept Peptamen Junior. So these formulas, again, if you have somebody who's vomiting or having intolerance of their tube feeds, these are good options. For patients with inflammatory bowel disease, sometimes I like to start my tube feeders on these just because I'm like, your gut is really upset. And if I could just be a little nicer, I will. But that's not based in science. That's based in my clinical judgment. There's, we can use exclusive enteral nutrition as therapy for IBD, and there haven't been shown any more positive effects with these formulas over the intact ones. So. And the tippy top again, so amino acid based hypoallergenic. These are for the kids, with multiple food allergies or eosinophilic esophagitis. These are the formulas for those conditions. You can actually use nutrition as therapy for EOE, and it's 100% these formulas, depending on the situation. You can also put them on an elimination diet and supplement with these, but again, they come in flavors, which helps a little. The Neocate Splash, like you said, is still kind of that milky appearance, but it is now nutritionally complete, which I think is great. The Neocate Splash also doesn't require mixing, which is nice, and it comes in a cute little juice-esque box, which might make kids feel more normal, which is also helpful. The Elicare Junior and the Neocate Junior, they've been around the longest, and they make roughly the same flavors. I did a side-by-side tasting of the Elicare Junior chocolate and the Neocate Junior chocolate, and they do taste quite different. So if you have a kid who, you need to switch to an amino acid-based formula, give them a variety and don't, of the flavors and the brands, because they do taste different.
Just have a question. For the dietitians who've worked in WIC a long time, have you seen an increase of requests coming in for these formulas? Less.
I agree.
What do you say, Dan?
Certainly not more.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, but anyways, I think that's everything. So vitamins, and I'll try to be quick. So not all diets are nutritionally complete. We know this. And malnutrition can come in many forms. So it's important to remember that malnutrition, the literal meaning of the word is bad nutrition. So, there's kids who you look at their growth chart and they look beautiful, and then you get a diet history and you're like, oh my gosh, you're eating 3 foods. That's malnutrition. So vitamin supplements are sometimes needed. I do, again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of like to use them as a Band-Aid for the, those kids that you're like, I feel like you're going to eventually start eating and you're growing fine, and maybe a multivitamin might be helpful. Conditions that cause malabsorption, of course, can cause vitamin losses. Where you live, Oregon, Pacific Northwest, increased nutrient needs, so cystic fibrosis and things like that. So the regulation, there was an act in 1994. Manufacturers and distributors are responsible for evaluating the safety and the labeling of their products. So they're responsible for figuring out whether it's safe or not, which is a little interesting. And the FDA will only take action after it reaches the market. So that means it's made it into people's homes and bodies and things like that. So just something to keep in mind. When I look at a vitamin supplement, I try to make sure that it's age appropriate. So I look at the nutrients compared to the DRIs and the upper limits, and just make sure that nothing's totally interesting. Making sure things aren't excessive, especially the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Figuring out, does this child need iron or do they not? If they don't need iron, then they can buy, a gummy multivitamin. If they need iron, there's only one gummy out there. I can never remember the name, but there's very few gummies that have the iron because it tastes bad. And of course, making sure that, like vitamin D and iron are based on labs. And you guys check that iron stuff closely, which is really helpful. because we certainly get those milk drinkers that quite low in iron. Vitamin D. So it's naturally in very few foods, hence why it's added to the milk. Breastfed infants, of course, require 400 international units of vitamin D daily. Formula fed infants, it depends on how much they're drinking. So if they're drinking less than a liter a day of formula, they'll need some supplemental vitamin D, whether it's 200 or 400 units. Again, looking at those lab values and figuring out whether they're deficient or insufficient, like our computer system doesn't necessarily mark the insufficient values, so having a dietitian look at that closely, the age of the patient, of course, and then whether you're using D2 or D3. How I remember that cholecalciferol is D3, is C is the third letter in the alphabet, so it's helpful. And then rechecking labs, because again, you don't want somebody on vitamin D like for years and years and years without being rechecked. 2 to 3 months. Iron, so of course important for hemoglobin and blood and muscle proteins as well as enzymes. Food sources, so heme is much more readily absorbed and utilized than non-heme iron. Iron absorption is increased with vitamin C, so I say, if you need to take your iron, drink it with a glass of orange juice, but you have to make sure that orange juice isn't calcium fortified, because calcium can decrease the iron absorption. Iron, of course, can be constipating and can change the stool color, so I do always try my best to remind them of that and make sure they're getting enough fluid and fiber to stay regular.
One thing I think is really nice is just making sure that our messages are consistent. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Nothing groundbreaking. That was my goal. Calcium, so of course healthy bones and teeth, cell signaling though as well. Too much calcium can cause iron absorption problems, and so that is again definitely something that I look for. When I ask what do you like to drink, and they say water and milk and juice, I say, how much milk? And I don't take too much or not very much for an answer. I've had some families have been like, well, how much milk? A lot. I'm like, how much? They're like 1 glass a day. I'm like, that's not a lot. Like, how big is your glass? Like this big. Okay, that's fine. A lot to me is, I don't know, I'm so skewed, but, more than 30 ounces a day. Definitely I've had kids drinking entire gallons. So, if on a dairy-free diet, ensure that the milk alternative is fortified with calcium and vitamin D. So this is a challenge on WIC because my understanding is the milk alternatives are soy and goat. Soy, yeah. So and
once they can get the nutrient density up, and river milk is pea
protein. Yeah.
Except that ours are all, the soy milk that we have is got the calcium and the vitamin.
Which is great.
No, I'm saying those alternatives.
Which is great.
She was just saying that soy milk, but it was like ours is, the reason it's on is because it's been fortified with, to make it.
Yeah. So if on a dairy-free diet, again, for those milk protein intolerant kids, we oftentimes avoid soy because there's cross-reactivity with the two. We do challenge a lot of our milk protein sensitive babies by about 10 months, depending on the gastroenterologist, and I leave it up to them. When we try, we sometimes wait to a year. We oftentimes retry, or they accidentally eat it, so we have our data right there, about every 2 months. But oftentimes, again, these babies are eating, or toddlers now, I guess, are eating a wide variety of food, and they're just limiting dairy and or soy. So, making sure that alternative is suitable. Soy, people have a lot of opinions, like I mentioned, about soy, and so I've actually run it. I used to recommend soy as the alternative if it wasn't a milk protein intolerant baby, and so many families are worried about the estrogenic effects of soy and just don't believe that it just doesn't align with their nutritional beliefs. And so I've now tended more towards the Ripple oat and hemp milk. Ripple, like you said, is the pea protein. It's about, for the vanilla, it's 130 calories per cup and 8 grams of protein, which is fairly close to whole milk at 150 calories per cup, 8 grams of protein and 8 grams of fat. Oat milk, little low in protein and fat, but not that bad in hemp, which is quite grassy tasting. Does also have decent nutrition. Everyone goes to almond milk, which has usually 30 to 60 calories per cup and like 0 grams of protein and 0 fat. So if it's, again, like a 10-year-old child who's eating everything and we put them on a dairy-free diet for some other reason or whatever, like EOE or whatever, if they're well nourished and eating a variety of foods, I don't care if almond milk is their thing, more power to them. Make sure that it's calcium, vitamin D fortified. I'm fine with that. If it's that 2-year-old who needs, a little bit more balanced nutrition source, I go with the Ripple or hemp. So, dairy. I think that's it. Dairy foods are important for calcium and fat, as we've been talking about, and Tums can be a good source of calcium, so don't forget that. That's reasonably affordable. Elimination diet, so I was doing a presentation on GI, and I was like, oh my gosh, all I do is take things away. So I try my best to find suitable alternatives and really try to talk about the positive, but sometimes it, kind of hit me that day. But anyways, we try again to make sure that their diet is nutritionally complete, make sure that they enjoy what they're eating. That's why I became a dietitian, because I love food and I want all of my patients to love their food. So I try my best to find as many alternatives that I can. Of course, there's personal choices or experiences, and of course, medical diagnoses. Diet is really easy to change on their own. So if you're having symptoms or your kid's having symptoms, it's really easy to go online, Google it, and there'll be diets that you can try. You can try diets at home without any medical knowledge or advice, but you certainly can't try a prescription-only medication. So it's really easy to change at home, which can be dangerous. So we definitely, want to know about those. Foods, the main nutrients of concern. All right, last case study. So this is a 14-year-old with fatigue. Overall healthy, the growth charts look great. Noted to be a picky eater. The blood test had macrocytic anemia and low vitamin B12. No celiac. Given vitamin B12 injections and dietary advice. Could not find a definition as to what that meant. A few years later, he developed hearing loss with vision symptoms. And so he had an MRI exam that were normal. Years later, found progressive vision loss. Had a scope, fibroscan, bigger workup this time, another MRI. Here are the blood. You can see what's interesting about them is nothing is like the alk phosphate. Nothing is like terribly far out of range. And same with here, vitamin D, but again, a low vitamin D isn't going to be like, ooh, big, something out of the ordinary. We see that all the time. And again, none of those values are remarkably out of range. Homocysteine, though, quite out of range as well as that MMA. So we had that persistent macrocytosis with a normal folate and vitamin B12. The homocysteine and the MMA, methylmalonic acid, indicating a functional B12 deficiency, and that's what actually led to a dietitian evaluation. Found to not be drinking alcohol or smoking. The growth continued to be fine, but it was discovered that since elementary school, he had avoided quite a few foods. So here's where that headline, this is from the news, came out. Kid goes blind by eating only French fries and white bread. And so those were the 5 foods there that he had been eating for quite some time. And it was discovered that he had finished the previous vitamin B12 injections. So they were providing supplements and referred to mental health for kind of, I would say, more of a disordered eating pattern. And his vision stabilized. Unfortunately, it did not improve. The neuropathy continued. That delayed diagnosis probably wasn't hopeful. And so that's why the homocysteine and the MMA are more sensitive than just vitamin B12. And I can it's common enough, but it's not the only indicator of malnutrition, and you all know this. And so definitely, doctors and nurse practitioners, physician assistants, they don't have time to, get a detailed diet history or more details about what they like to eat. And so, not making sure that you understand what are fruits that you eat, what are vegetables that you eat. Oh, none? Okay, well, are you taking a multivitamin? Are you taking any other vitamin, mineral, or herbal supplements or things like that? And getting as much information as we can and not always that growth chart.
So there's just some positive, some sound issues going on. If on the phone, you can mute if you haven't already. Yes. So we do have a question for you.
Yeah.
I didn't want to.
No, you're good.
Something like total comfort children and.
So let's go back.
Does anybody have questions?
Have you tried giving?
It almost sounds so the question is, maybe I'd like to because it's stools and reduces strain. So that's a good point.
That was my question. Did they tell you why?
They see less blood. I'm not quite sure.
So it may not lead to the cardiac. Used to seeing cardiac cancer.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that.
So the last one, yeah, it's us. I'm going to. So let me just figure out how to. A question was, could using supplements actually be counterproductive in some situations? Like maybe the baby is just making the child less hungry for real foods, which may provide more nutrients, calories, etc. I haven't seen a success in one kid on Pediatric for several years. Looking back at charts, this is Kathleen Box, and she hasn't met Cheryl, has she? Yeah. It goes long back, Kathleen, and yes, we agree with you that Pediatric is a marketing meeting. That's my soapbox, and I'll step back off. Yes. Yes.
It started because of pediatrics.
And there is one more question. I would like to share that I have several sources of fairs. Yeah, sorry, I'm having a really hard time. Let me real quick see if I can meet somebody. Jamila, do you want to look at me?
And look at the questions here too. Very fancy. Oh, I'm not seeing it here for what. All right, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna come back. Hi, can you hear us? Maddie?
No. Greg said yes, I can hear Jamila.
Oh, okay, great.
So they,
And you don't need to share your screen again unless.
the question again is from Kathleen. I wanted to share that I've heard, where did it go?
Here, use this.